Hi, my name is Will, and I have a background as a software engineer, architect, and CTO. I just had the opportunity to do an interview with an AI-centric company called LiquidMetal.ai. What they do is they make a MCP server or a plugin that you can add into Claude Code, one of the most popular developer-oriented LLMs, that allows you to easily provision backend services. So what I wanted to do was talk to them about things like, where do you find a moat as an AI company? Where do you see the role of the developer, both today and how it's evolving? And they're hiring. So I wanted to get a sense of what kind of jobs and skills they were looking for. And also we talk a little bit about media and economics and sort of the longer term trends for these things and where they're going. So it's a far wide-ranging conversation. Highly recommend listening to the whole thing. But if you want to skip directly to a section like the career section, I've included links in the description to skip ahead in the table of contents. I hope you really enjoy the conversation, and thank you for watching. Take care. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. You guys are with LiquidMetal.ai, and rather than me butcher your intros, let's just take a moment for you guys to go ahead. I'll start out. Gino, why don't you just tell people who you are and what your role is and
Sure.
what you're hoping to talk about.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having us on, Will. Gino Valente. I run the go-to-market engineering teams here at LiquidMetal.ai.
Cool.
Okay.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I work with on the go-to-market team on our products and primarily around selling and marketing towards developers.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so just to get started, like, what is Liquid Metal and like why is it LiquidMetal.ai? Like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah. It was, why is it LiquidMetal.ai is an interesting one. When we pivoted from a previous company and we were looking for a name, we knew we wanted to build a platform for agentic AI. Believe it or not, it's what you think it is. It came from Terminator. The cop from Terminator, the one that melts and comes back together, the T-2000 or whatever, is quote unquote made of liquid metal.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an homage, if you will, to AI in some interesting way, and ultimately just the name stuck. It also sounded a little bit like something a race car themed thing could be, and one of our top engineers is really into race cars, so he loved it too. So that's where the name came from. So LiquidMetal.ai. We've been trying to find a way to shorten down really quickly what it is we do, and I think we've finally done it. It's Claude native infrastructure. So we built basically an MCP that allows you to build and deploy backend and full stack applications, but we mainly focus on the backend. We're not necessarily going to be the best front end platform in the world, but the real challenge in the industry right now is developing backends and AI backends. And what if something like Claude Code can now do that? And so Liquid Metal has a product or a platform called Raindrop. You connect Raindrop to Claude Code, and Claude native infrastructure is born, and that's what we do. And so we help companies build agentic AI simply by using Claude Code.
Cool. So Claude Code right now, I'm going to say I think it's probably one of the best, LLMs for software dev right now. It's an MCP, so theoretically you could also drop it into other MCP hosts as well, right? So it's not. Could you use it with other things besides Claude Code, or no?
You could, except we're really focused on the flow. And
Okay.
so there are some decisions that we have to make. And so the decisions along the way through, and Foca built most of this, it's sort of an AI state machine where the MCP isn't just being told what to do, it's part of the orchestration. And that orchestration is custom built to work with Claude Code. Could you connect it? Yeah. Will the orchestration work flawlessly? Don't know.
Okay.
We got to focus somewhere. And so our efforts are in making the Claude Code experience the perfect one.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
All right. So
I think the reason that it won't work, it really relies on a lot of the structures that Claude Code provides you. And so Claude has like these internal knowledge files, Claude MDs, and then it's got like ways to like store data locally. And so that might or might not work if you were to plug it in, say, like a cursor or something else. Honestly, haven't tested it. But yeah, the focus is more and more on Claude, and we'll start adding more and more features that once Claude starts supporting them. And we will never guarantee that they work anywhere else. It's purely designed for Claude at this point.
Okay. So at this point, I mean, hypothetically, if like, an enterprise customer and said, we'll write you a check for 10 million to port it to you.
Yeah, no problem.
Technically, you could.
Let us know.
Yeah, I think part of what, and this I didn't, is interesting to me because MCP is typically kind of portrayed as more of a standard for plugins, right? And so the notion that you're going to leverage that, but then have it be a little bit more focused on one LLM stack and host, one LLM host is kind of interesting. Which I guess, okay, so to kind of segue into the next piece, is that part of where, so let me step back. So one of the things that I think about with AIs, and you talk about sort of the broader vision, where it's like, yeah, eventually the AIs are going to write all your code and manage all your infrastructure. And then you start asking these questions, both about, from a business standpoint, what's the moat, and then longer term, what's the role of the developer? So, and the developer career path. And so just to start, let's talk a little bit about the moat. And this is kind of where it's interesting, because like MCP as a sort of generic plugin system would imply that it would work lots of things. Implicitly, there's already a little bit of a moat potential in the sense of like all the stuff that gets built around the LLM and the LLM host. So is that, like, how do you guys think about building a moat for what you're doing? And then how do you think about what the LLM providers, the makers, the hosts, in some ways I sort of, like I sort of call like an OpenAI or an Anthropic, they're like an LLM hosting provider, right? They build this thing and then they manage the hosting of it, right? So for you guys, first off, I guess, like, what do you guys think of as your moat?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one we have thought about a lot when we're kind of deliberating what the go-to-market should be for a product like this and who this is for. So I think, first of all, to kind of address your questions around MCP, right? One of the pet peeves that we have with regular MCP is that it's often just a wrapper around an API. And that's generally fine, but it doesn't necessarily tell the LLM really how to use the entire platform. It can maybe create a bucket on AWS or submit a PR through GitHub or do one particular thing, but it doesn't necessarily tell the LLM how to make all of that work together and achieve a goal. And so that's kind of where we said, like, okay, MCP needs to be a little bit different. What we've done is effectively build an MCP state machine where one of the MCPs basically just returns a prompt with, this is what you got to do to complete this step, and then this is the next step you have to do to get through this flow. And then we have designed that flow on how to build applications through that MCP server. There's a couple interesting bits there that make it really powerful for us, which is that, one, since it's a remote MCP server, we can update what that does on the fly. And so if we introduce a new feature, you got to do nothing to get that new feature, and you instantly get that, new goodness. Secondly, it allows us to store state. And so we build a whole bunch of components, one of which is agent memory, and we're using it ourselves too. And so we can store the state of building your application remotely, which, one, allows you to come back to it, and two, allows you to sort of have this multiplayer effect where if I'm defining a PRD and I have a product manager that needs to approve it, they can open Claude Desktop. Doesn't have to be Claude Code since it's an MCP server. So that's kind of where the transfer comes in. And they can provide feedback on that PRD, and then we can kind of communicate through Claude in a way. And so there's a really interesting multiplayer aspect there. Now, none of that is the moat. That is just the interesting part of the way we kind of set up to use this. Because if you think about it, since we're sending back the prompts that the LLM needs to execute, right? So if you wanted to copy that, the entire infrastructure to copy that is basically told to you by the output of the MCP. So that can't be the moat. And so the part where we really think that we have something different is the platform underneath. And so we started building this framework about a year ago, with the thought of building a framework that would be very easy to build agentic applications or AI-infused applications at the time. And we had a couple, like, sort of core features in mind that we wanted to build. So one of which was everything had to be versionable and branchable. So you have versionable and branchable compute. which means that you and I can work on the same application and have a copy of our entire data stack and can work against it without necessarily affecting production data. That in particular tends to be really, really useful for, quote unquote, vibe coding or AI augmented programming, because you get the full state and you can mess it completely up and roll it back if you want to and start a new branch from there. And I don't know if when you're vibe coding or when you're building something with AI, a lot of the times you just basically start a GitHub branch, you let it do the thing, and if it works, you merge it in. If it doesn't work, you kind of have these checkpoints to go back to. So it's effectively checkpoints, but then for production-ready infrastructure. And so you can really test it and use it yourself. The other core feature was data capture. And so every single interaction that you might have with one of the resources, and we have a ton, right? We've got buckets, databases, AI models, and then a couple of ones like custom built ones that we can dive up into in a second. But every single interaction you have with a resource is tracked, logged, and available to the LLM. And that is, as it turns out, an amazing feature if you want an LLM to debug something. Because where do LLMs go off the rails? Well, if they don't have the context. And so having the exact context of how does my data flow through my application, which data was involved, which operations were performed, is super helpful in that point. And so those were some of the sort of the core features we started building in that platform, originally for humans. But it turns out that they're very, very useful for AIs. And so I think part of that is the moat. And then in addition, we started kind of building products with our own product for like things that everybody needs, right? So when we started Liquid Metal, the first thing we did, we actually started sort of as a consultancy. And the thought was never to be a consultancy forever, but the thought was to kind of be where it happens and build these applications and learn from building them for our customers. And so we had a lot of customers that came to us that wanted to build some kind of agentic AI application. And the first step was always build a RAG pipeline. And, building a RAG pipeline itself, if you look at what's online in terms of tutorials, doesn't sound that hard, right? You grab a vector database, you kind of set that up, do some embeddings, and, Bob's your uncle. That's great for a demo, but it does not scale to production, right? And this is a real problem with RAG pipelines because you can't really tell the quality. It seems to work because there's an answer coming back and that answer sounds reasonable because an LLM can make everything sound reasonable. But in reality, like that's missing a whole bunch of context. It doesn't really have the right information. And so if you want to build a real RAG pipeline, you're building, a vector database, a graph database, entity extractions, image embeddings, audio transcriptions, right? If you have multiple input files there, file types. And so that ends up being like a 4 to 6 month project for the average developing team at the time. I think you can do it a lot faster now with AI, but still it's not an easy thing to design and build. And so if you want to build if you want to build applications with AI, if the first step is to build still these fairly large, complex things, then you're never going to get very far. And so what we started doing is saying like, okay, let's wrap those up as building blocks inside of the platform. And so now we have a product or a feature called Smart Buckets, which allows you to basically update audio and video and images and PDFs and whatever. And we do what we call AI decomposition and basically have a fully fledged enterprise-ready RAG pipeline. Then we're adding Smart SQL this week. We added agent memory last week, and actually agent memory is 4 different components. You got like working memory, semantic memory, episodic memory, and procedural memory. And they all have their own like little features, but they're very important for, say, building AI agents, right? And so now we're starting to build like a whole bunch of these basically Lego blocks that Claude Code and our MCP then can use to build fairly advanced applications without necessarily having to build all the complex infrastructure underneath. And so those things together give you a platform that allow you to build really interesting applications and make it very useful for AI. And I think that platform itself is the moat that people can access through our MCP server. But that MCP server is just, the interface that you end up having to talk to. Could have been an API in the previous days. Now is an MCP server that talks to, or that an LLM talks to. So it's a bit of a long-winded way, but like I think that's really where you can find the moat in our platform.
Well, I think, and I would say I have some notes because I had like several things to touch on. One of those, like one version of what is a moat is it's deployed and working. Like, not to put too fine a point on it, but there's like a ton of DB2 and Oracle and, AS400 still floating around out there, and, it's deployed. So to a certain extent, the more that you get customers that have deployments that are managed by this tooling, the stronger position you're in for the longer term. And you could make a case, like we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the economics around AI and LLMs and all that stuff. And part of what popped into my head was some of the things related to like railroads and oil magnets and things like that, where right now most people like railroads are important, but there was this period when railroads were the tech world of everything, and there was a tremendous amount of wealth and economic activity. If I said to you, oh well, that only had an 80-year run, like, is there a moat for railroads long term? Well, kind of no, because transportation and all that, but also it's like good enough. And so I wonder a little bit about some of these conversations about moats jumping ahead too far. Like, if for the next 10 years we're going to need different components of these technologies, that's still valid. And just if in some hypothetical future it goes away, that doesn't mean it's not worth doing the endeavor today. So I think deployment becomes a moat. Another point you touched on about vibe coding in the quote. One of the things I've seen somebody talk about was the demographic differences for how AI is used by different age groups. And one of the ones that cut me to the core was they said, well, older folks, what they'll do, or more experienced folks, what they'll do is they'll fire up one LLM in terminal and they'll watch it. And part of it is they're trying to look for code quality. They're trying to, understand what it's doing, what have you. And the people who are less experienced, but a lot more into the AI world, potentially like, maybe you graduated from CS 2 years ago. And so for you, this is just the way dev works. They might have 10 windows up and running, or stuff's on the server running. And they're just like, whatever, I look at the results. I don't even try to pretend to watch it while it's going. Which cracks me up, because that's like, that mythical 10x developer thing. And it's like, well, if one developer's watching one terminal, one's watching 10, does that reflect an interpretation of 10x? So I tried doing some of that. Like, I'm going to fire up a whole bunch of terminals and see how they're going. And number one, oh my gosh, you burn through tokens fast. Like it's really expensive, right?
It's expensive.
And then the other one is, it's actually stressful. Like, if you just have one thing going in the window on the side and you've got a decent sized monitor, and so you could be like, I'm going to check, the interwebs on one side, watch a video, read an article, whatever, and then watching it do its work, versus, if I'm sitting there watching 10 windows going or constantly responding because each window, and then I'm the human bottleneck in what it's doing, that's actually like a lot. It feels like, the rat in the cage getting poked with the stick all the time, trying to process through that, which maybe is also part of a little bit of a preview as to the tension for what jobs, developer jobs or technology jobs start looking like. Like, you sort of alluded to how the tooling has in the ability in it to do multiplayer, right? And implicit to me, what I'm thinking about when you talk about that is, okay, that to me sounds like land of a million micro branches, right? And then how are you integrating that back together? Like, which pieces actually get pulled to prod, which ones don't? And I remember thinking through, thinking about different get branch management strategies, where it's like, well, how do you let's say I have a team of 50 people, and they're all supposed to hypothetically be working on the same code base. A good architect can come in and say, well, this is how we're going to modularize things. This is how we're going to keep people working in their own repos. This is what API contracts are going to look like, all that thought. But if I've got, 50 people with LLMs and they're all burning through code really fast, what does that look like? So does that make and that's where there's this, tension about making the job in a sense higher level, but also harder. Like when you were talking about all the different components of that pipeline, like, oh, I've got a, vector DB for doing the RAG stuff, and I'm doing deployments, and I've got my stack, and am I doing, hypothetically it's SQL or NoSQL, and what's my schema look like, and oh, where am I going to deploy my functions to, and, oh, wait, who's watching for security and stuff, right? Like, if I'm working in a roles model, did I make sure that that particular function that I just knocked out, that's maybe the financial access, financial reviews. I mean, we've seen stuff. I can't count the number of times in my career that I've heard a story about some manager that mailed out a spreadsheet that had everybody's salary in it. Right. And what cracks me up is when that happened for me, the manager had simply selected the cells and hidden them and then mailed out the spreadsheet.
Didn't know.
They didn't think, right? So that skill gap, right? So to me, of course, I will confess that I found it a little challenging for me to take that manager seriously as a technology professional when they can't manage Excel like that. What does it mean? Like if I'm a not semi-technical person and I, vibe code some stuff, but I don't even think to ask about that,
I think there's a role here. And again, this is maybe a little bit of the moat, but less so because it's very much exposed through the MCP server. But the way we're designing this product too is that we are effectively, we're very opinionated with our own framework, which is good in this sense, because what it means is that it's a very much a boundary around what we care about, and everything else we don't have to worry about because it's not within the framework and we're only building within this framework. But then it also allows us, like without going into too much detail, we have like these things called services and observers and actors, and some of them have state stores and others are stateless, and some of them are watching buckets and queues and whatever. But they're very much predefined on what they do. And the platform, although it's currently not in there, but in version 2 it will be in there, which is it will have like architectural diagrams effectively, right? And initially that's going to be for a couple things, but we expect that to grow quite a bit. So let's say you show up and you say like, I want to build a multi-agent system. Well, we've done that with our platform. And so we know, like, you have a coordinating agent, which is usually an actor, and then you got services underneath that are sub agents, and they need some kind of queue system between them so you can queue to work and whatever. And so we can provide an architectural diagram through the agent so that when you describe in natural language what your agent wants to do, that the architecture is well designed and will work. And I think you can kind of do a similar thing with security, although it's not obviously waterproof. You got to do, this is an interesting challenge for us in the future, not us, but us as an industry, right? Yeah. Like you can do kind of similar things. So we already have prompts that describe how to write proper TypeScript, proper typing, and making sure you catch, like if you did external calls, that you have like proper try catching and whatever, right? But I can imagine there's like a security prompt there where there's like a security reviewer that you can kind of pull into the project that ends up being Claude, but Claude reviewing Claude is fine, to do that first pass test. And then given the multiplayer aspect, we already have this feature where basically the PM has to sign off on the PRD. All right, so the product manager defines the product, and so we got to make sure that what we're building is actually what we should be building. But since the developer is now doing this conversation with Claude, you might cut out the product manager, so they need to give approval there. You can do a similar thing with like a security reviewer, where they have to watch the code and review the code before it is allowed to be moved into production, or right. And so it kind of maybe changes the nature of the game a little bit. And maybe changes the roles a little bit. But I think there's very much just like these things that already exist will just change it into like different versions of themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the concerns folks have is that eventually this AI stuff winds up looking like the humans are the liability shield for the AI, right? So like I'm, as a human, my role in this process is to review everything the LLMs do, because if you think about like an LLM is like non-deterministic programming and code is deterministic, my role is to ensure that transition happens, and the human liability component is both good and scary. Like there was, I think it was the Uber thing a while, like this was years ago, but they were testing out self-driving cars, right? And there was a woman that they'd hired to be like the human minder for the self-driving car. And so she'd been spending hours and hours and hours sitting in this car driving itself. And so she at some point pulled out her phone and started, messing around with it and then the car hit somebody. It was really bad. And so, like, to a certain extent, one interpretation of some of these future tech roles winds up looking like I'm the human reviewer for all the code that's coming through. And, basically I get paid money to do that. And if I fail, then I get fired. And like, there are people who have very different feelings about that as far as whether or not that's a rewarding career or not. Much like a lot of jobs, I think the whole point is that it's not fun. That's why you pay somebody to do it.
That's why you have to get paid to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I
and
got something there.
yeah,
Just to pile on, a couple things came by.
yeah,
there are some decisions that we make at the platform level. Like everything is tenant isolated. So by default, your entire environment isn't sitting in a multi-tenant place where Coke can see Pepsi and Pepsi can see Mountain Dew or whatever the right phrase is. And so we can do some things at that level to protect people from each other. And then by default, we'll support basically public, private, and protected deployments, where something like private is the default. And so now everything in terms of tokens and keys and JWTs, everything gets set up for you as you deploy in a very, very smart and non-way. Now I can't stop the human from taking their, quote unquote S3 bucket and making it public and shoving a bunch of stuff in there. But that's where the reviewer idea that Foka had would be like, hey, are you sure that's a good idea? Are you sure that's something that you want to do? The other one is around sort of ethical AI. And it's, just coming a little bit, not a security background, but I spent a decent amount of time at Splunk. And so worked with a lot of CISOs across the United States at very large, Fortune 500s. And the explainability of AI is another whole piece of it. So keeping it secure, but those same people are the ones who have to make sure that it doesn't sell a car for $1 or yell out some sort of racial slur or expose company secrets. And all that stuff is still part of, let's say, the CISO's responsibility. And so the full data capture that we added in is also there, not only for AI to debug things, but also for you to explain why it gave the answer that it gave. Like I can trace when you ask a question in the front or you hit the API, I can give you a trace all the way through for every single API transaction in full fidelity for every transaction. That could be 100 requests per second. We keep it all. And so that explainability becomes an interesting piece that's useful for security. So yeah, I think there will be roles where people have to check, the human has to check the work. But if you give them a private thing, if you give them an agent that can look at the other agents, if you give them the data that they can look at to make sure it's not doing something unethical, then maybe that job becomes a little bit more fun too.
I think also, Gina, to add there, like there's so one of the other things Gina was talking about explainability. Another important piece is the kill switch. Right? Being able to say this data needs to be killed because it should not, like the spreadsheet, right? Example. The platform has the ability to kill switch data to no longer use it anywhere. So that's helpful in that sense. But to kind of come back to your point of like, okay, is the human going to be the reviewer and therefore responsible for the AI? I get the fear because that job sounds like it really sucks. Right? You're basically a PR reviewer, and that's awful. And honestly, engineers are not good at PR reviewing. I've seen some horrible stuff.
I mean, there's a lot of dev managers that I think somewhat unintentionally wound up in that space.
Yeah, and I think the other problem with it is, and this is why I think we're not going to end up in that space, I just think it's simply not manageable. If you look at the amount of code that LLMs can generate, and how fast development is going because of that, there's no human that can do that. So we're going to have tooling to do that for us, right? And so, yeah,
this is the heart. Because like this is the thing to me is like from an economic standpoint, there's this question of like what's the demand for software development? Like if I said that it was infinite, that doesn't necessarily make sense. So implicit in that is there's a limit of some kind. I feel like I already experience app fatigue. Like I used to be like when I first got my iPhone back in the day and I was like, oh, I'm gonna check the app store all day to see what the new thing is. And now I've gone like almost the other way. Like I recently just cleared out, a ton of games I never play, and I'm like, apps from travel things I don't need and blah blah blah. So I'm actually at I want less apps in my life, but I want them to freaking work. Like that's one of the things that annoys me. Like, I have a car it's an EV, which I really like, but the app kind of is janky. And it's like, the insurance app, I'm going to call out my chart from Epic. Like that app we all live on for everything. And it's terrible. It's so janky and lame. And so why is it, like, to me, it's like, well, don't tell me about, how software is going to eat or AI is going to eat software, and LLMs are going to probably out dev until at least the apps I have on my phone aren't terrible. I've got a Steam Deck now. It's cool, but yeah, it's janky. Like certain things, like, because it's using Proton to emulate the Windows apps. It's like, yeah, it's got gaps in it. Theoretically, there's no reason LLMs couldn't be used to solve that. Right. But we're not close. The nth version of that just cracks me up is someone's like, LLMs suck. And it's like, why? And he's like, well, I put this prompt in and I couldn't hit it. And the prompt was write GTA 7 in TypeScript.
Yeah.
And you're like,
but that's a very good point, right? And I see this constantly on these Reddits and people that start getting into the, like, let's call it vibe coding, but even like experienced software engineers, right? This morning I forgot who it was, but he was like, I'm a software engineer, 10 years of experience, and I just started using Claude Code, and I don't get the hype because it's just not doing what I want it to do. And this guy had this, like, I don't even remember if it was a large prompt, but he basically wanted it to refactor the entire code base and do everything all at once. And it's just like, I'm like, yeah, that will not work, right? You still have to cut down the work. You still got to architect the work. You still got to describe what you want. And one of the things we started realizing building this platform and then playing with it ourselves is that, and the PRD, the product requirements document, is everything. Right. And so we're just basically moving some of the complexity from building software into writing natural language. But if that PRD is trash, then the output's going to be trash. And any gap you leave, it will fill in. And it might fill it in right. It might fill it in wrong. You just don't know. Right. And so over the weekend, I was vibe coding something myself to kind of see if I could do it. And I built this like Untapped, but then for coffee. It's like where you check in your beers, but then you do it for coffee beans. I'm a big coffee snob. And so I was like, all right, I want that. Let's see if I can build it. And it was like a 64 API endpoints that I needed for the app that I vibe coded together. The front end was beautiful. And then it built the backend. And it did it with our platform, and it built the whole thing. And it was fast. It's like, wow, this is so much faster than it's done it before. And so I tested the API. I was like, everything works. And I started looking at the code, and it was all just mock data. It was all just returning, okay. Okay, right? And so none of it was actually implemented. It was all just placeholders for the API inputs. And so technically, right, because the point was you have to test, you have to pass the test.
Yeah.
That was done, but my prompting was too wide for it to just basically, like really say what it had to do. I was too lazy. And so I think there's a big part there that people forget about AI. It's like, maybe you're not writing the lines of code, but you still got to tell it what to do, and you better do it well.
But here's the thing that's crazy, right? There was a company that we worked with at one of my previous companies, and they were a bank. They were a bank, at local bank, and their development model was the first draft of everything they would ship to an offshore company. And so then the devs that were local, they would then get that code back, and then their job was to make it work. And I asked them, like, well, number one, why? And they were like, well, because the finance people wanted to get the overall cost per hour down. So it was like bordering on nonsense. Yeah, it was bordering on nonsensical. If the boss says this is the model for we're going to do stuff. So in that scenario, I could see someone saying, look, tell you what, how about we just do the work locally, and I'm going to use the LLM, and we'll skip that part. So that does, in a sense, translate to it. I was a part of I was brought in as a technical expert for a lawsuit because someone had used an offshore firm to build an app, and they had sent back an app that was filled with mock stuff, just like what you're describing. Like the PRD said, you know, the app should calculate the sales tax, e.g., you know, 10% in Washington for Washington State. And they wrote out code that there was a function that returned if the state was Washington, 10%, and that was it. And so if there wasn't, if it wasn't Washington State, there's no tax. So this isn't, to me, doesn't feel like new to AI or LLMs. It's just, you know, part of that evolving thought, which does kind of map to a video I did a little while ago about how we're all dev managers now. You know,
everybody's a product manager, right?
Product, well, yeah,
or dev manager, yeah,
or both.
Yeah.
Like one of the things with cross-functional matrix design is then you wind up with little silos, right? So I've got my PM team and my QA team and my dev team and my deployment team, and they all kind of hate each other and fight. And one thing that cracks me up is, does this mean everybody brings their own AI to the table and then they get to fight? So like when there's a PR that's submitted, you know, the LLM that's managed by security gets a review, the LLM that's managed by some QA team gets a review, international localization gets a review, right? Like everybody gets to fight and the LLMs all fight. And then there's like a bazillion token burn attached to every PR because of it. All right. So I'm going to, in terms of next thing. Oh, so here's one of the core ones, right? Like, and this is one of the things that a lot of folks that have been coming to my channel have been checking out, which is topic about careers and jobs. Mm-hmm. So let's say that, let's start with somebody who was studying CS, and maybe they either graduated, you know, last spring, or maybe they're their senior year and they're going, oh my gosh. I mean, like, what am I going to do? Do I have a job or not? What should I focus on? What would you guys say to somebody like that? You know, I'm fresh. I'm either right out of school or I'm going to be out of school in a year. What do you do? What would you recommend to them?
Couple things. I think they need to be, at this point, AI native in terms of what they're building and doing. You had mentioned having 3 terminals going at the same time. I'm not sure someone like me who's hiring, and we are hiring, for example, cares about you being able to do 3 things. I care about the outcome. And so if you can, you know, use AI to generate and do something interesting or solve a problem, that's what we're looking for. And I think others are like that. I've heard it, like you can go to some of the biggest companies in the world and they'll ask you a technical question and it's like, well, yeah, you can use Cursor and an LLM to solve it. I don't care. I just need the code, right? So we've seen companies shift to be okay with you using AI to solve the problem, but it's still in that problem solving kind of world. Like you have to be able to solve it. Yeah. So I would say be AI native, be fluent in a few things. I've definitely personally been attracted, and I've talked to others, people that are out there building things somewhat in public. Like here's a GitHub repo, here's this thing that I built, here's this project that I've deployed that has 1,000 stars. And it's like, well, or 10,000 stars, and you're a 17-year-old, you know, high school kid. Like I'm interested in that because they're go-getters. They went and built something, they did it. Others found it interesting. Like that is a pretty interesting skill. I have a daughter at Ohio State, not in CS, but she's in pre-med PA basically. But the university just pushed an email out that basically said, hey, next year, AI is fully authorized in all projects and all things across the board. And so that's a flip. Like this semester, you could have failed a class because you used ChatGPT to write a paper, and next paper next year, complete free for all. It's encouraged. But I think what those universities are going to do is the same process. It's like, yeah, but give me your prompts, or tell me about what you were thinking about when you started writing or told ChatGPT to write or find the answer. I'm more curious in the thought process of getting there and how you can get to the outcome. So I would, if I was going to do a test for a software engineer, I wouldn't have them write code. I'd have them solve a problem, and I'd like to watch them solve it. That's the interesting part.
Okay, so there's a couple pieces. So like some of the schools, I've read that sales of Blue Books are up like 200, 300% because people are now saying, well, we're not going to have you take the test in front of a computer. You got to do Blue Book. The applicability for CS, but implicit in that is then an observational component, right? Like, because the worst case version is, well, I hired a guy to do the test for me, and there's been some stuff about people using LLMs to cheat and all that kind of stuff. So like years ago, I would have said to somebody, yeah, put your projects up on GitHub, and then that's a way to demonstrate what you're capable of. Does that imply that somebody needs to either A, record a video of themselves doing the work to demonstrate, and or B, you know, you mentioned social, like how many stars you have, for example. That's a form of social acknowledgement of your capabilities. That feels like a stretch for a lot of the introverted CS people I know. But is that part of what is going to be implicit, like up to and including the soft skills side? Like you don't just need to be a good dev, but you kind of do need to be able to do soft skill. So you guys are both nodding. About the soft skill.
Logan may have a different opinion, but I think the answer is yes. Like the human aspect of it will become a little more important. And I think it's the ability to get your idea across. I haven't formulated this thought completely, but the world has been, let's say someone like me, I'm not a coder. I was an electrical engineering graduate, barely got through college, got kind of the full lobotomy in 2000, moved into sales. I'm technical enough to talk, but I can't code anything. I can't build anything. I lost that skill. Frankly, never had it, right? And I would say that I've always been known as the idea guy. And the idea guy didn't get a whole lot of credit because if I had the idea for an app, well, I couldn't build it. I had no way of bringing it to the market. And I didn't have the money to go hire someone and pay him $150,000 to build this app just to see if it would work. And I found myself through the years constantly begging friends of mine, could you help me build this thing? Could you help me build that? I think I got an idea. Maybe we could do it. Well, the power was with the person who could code it. And so now I think with something like Claude Code and LiquidMetal or whatever you choose to use, that the power goes to the idea person again. That if you can conceive it and figure out how to create the outcome, that's what matters. And the person who knew the syntax of JavaScript or Tickle or Python or Perl or Ruby or whatever other languages you knew through the years, that value of that line of code is basically going to zero. The ability for you to take a million lines of code that have a value of zero and create an outcome is really what matters. And if that's done in the social world, great. And if it's done with just showing up with a portfolio of things that you've done in a job interview, I think that goes a long way. So it would be nice if you had the public thing, and I saw that and I knew it. But if a new college grad or a young professional walked into an interview and said, hey, I don't know if you wanted to see this or not, but here's the 5 things that I built using Claude Code, they get my attention like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, the nuance there, so there's a couple. One, so the entrepreneur forums for the last few years, they're just filled with people that are talking about using stuff like Bubble or other low-code, no-code tools right now. And it's the same thing. They're like, look, I want to get an MVP out. I'm going to use a drag and drop tool. That was even before the LLM stuff. And then a bunch of those low-code, no-code tools are adding LLMs where it's like, oh, I just need that one, you know, little JavaScript function, or I need that one little thing. So they knock that out. So we're already seeing that divergence. I can't tell from my bubble because, you know, most of the people I go have lunches and coffees and hang out with are all more senior devs, and a lot of them are, you know, Java enterprise background. So their problem set is different from, you know, I have an idea for a brand new app from scratch, which does kind of get back to a little bit of like, I build apps with my vibe coding. I publish them up, especially if they're like a, you know, web only, you know, PWA type thing. It's like I don't even have a backend, so I just push it to Vercel up, and it's like I don't even charge money for it because the economic value is so low. The people that at the enterprise side, and this may be part of the interview loop, is being able to triage when something's gone sideways. So like, why would I hire somebody who's got, you know, 5-10 years of, you know, JavaScript, TypeScript on the server, which, you know, whatever, that's sort of asymptotic, but yeah, it might be because I want to be able to fix things when stuff goes sideways. You know, the same thing on the Java stack. I mean, like anybody's ever, you know, dealt with the Spring Boot app that just suddenly starts barfing all sorts of stuff, and it's like just even trying to parse through the log, what the hell's going on? And the LLMs can help with that, for sure, but it's not the same. And you guys even, I think we're talking about adding in some of that auto repair stuff. I think you were talking earlier about like that feeling of, oh crud, you know, the tool can now find the issue, repair the issue, and that's part of that. Wait, what's my job? Vibe to it. Yeah.
I think though there's a distinction, and we're seeing this. So we just started opening beta access to the platform, and we got like 60 people that instantly were like, yes, I want to try this right now, right? And we were interested from like a go-to-market perspective, like what's the split there? Software engineers, vibe coders, CEOs, and it turns to be that it's like half of them are software engineers, roughly. Then a quarter of them are vibe coders, and the other quarter is like PMs or CEOs or something like that, right? People, and so I would actually argue that the PMs and the CEOs is effectively the same group. It's the idea guy in a sense.
Yeah.
And so, like, what's my job? I don't know if it's necessarily replacing anybody, but I think it's enabling a new group to participate in something that was previously not available to them. Like Gino was saying, right? I had an idea for an app. I just can't build it, right? And I'm the same way. Like I did data science in college, and basically went into sales, and I know how code works, but I couldn't necessarily write it. But now I can, because I understand enough of the underlying systems to build something. I just, I don't know the exact syntax of JavaScript, and honestly, I don't want to learn it either. And so, and we're seeing this exactly with the people that sign up. We had a call this morning with somebody who was like, my company needed this tool, and I don't have developers in the staff. So I vibe coded something myself with the front end. And she was kind of like now thinking about, okay, what does a backend look like? What is a backend? Was actually an interesting conversation. But I was actually, I was kind of amazed to see like how far she got with no technical chops, as she was saying herself. Yeah. But then basically building like these micro SaaS or internal tools yourself and enabling these people to do it. So this, I think, is enabling a whole bunch of people to get access to something that they previously didn't. Now, to your point, then what's my job, or what's a software engineer's job, right? I still think that there's a lot to do to enable those people, right? And we see it, like the stuff we're building, all our engineers are 100% in on Claude. If you're not, then you're not going to be a fit for our company, right? So like if you're thinking about applying for the job that we have open, if you don't use Claude, don't bother, or learn it and then apply, right? Like,
yeah.
But they use it in a much different way than these vibe coders are, right? They're like, I got this like 6,000 line refactor that I got to do, and it is stupid, right? But it has to happen. With one of our engineers moved us from NPM to PNPM.
You compiled some whole entire package into WASM. Like someone like me, I don't
even know what it means.
I don't know why I would do that. I know the acronym, but I vibe coded a website with like an AI thing where you could upload some music and blah blah blah, and like I'm at that level, and he's wrangling Claude Code to compile some entire package he needed into WASM so that he could deploy something at the edge, and it's like it's a different animal. But we're all using Claude and all doing the 10x thing of what we used to do. And so our deepest engineers, way down in full stack, lower level stuff, uses Claude every day, all day long.
It's a different thing. Yeah.
I mean, there is one interpretation, and for consulting, where you wind up looking like the expensive lawyer that you call once in a while, as opposed to somebody all the time. So if I'm a company that's a technology centric company, it's still a lot of value to have them on staff, just like I might have a legal team on staff because I'm suing people all day long or whatever. But if I'm an independent person, I might say, well, I'm just going to have my like technical person that I hop on the call with once every week to do the code review, which is kind of back to that concept of like I'm the reviewer or I'm the aide. And there's that thing about unknown unknowns, like the thing you don't even know that you don't know. If I say
that's the thing that's dangerous, right? Because like these vibe coders, I'm calling them vibe coders, but like they're real apps, right? They're real good apps, but like the security concerns are real.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing where like there might just be some, like you say, somebody that reviews stuff, or that takes a different look at it, and then uses AI to do that, but then can understand the decisions that have been made. I also think, and I've been thinking about this a lot. Actually, do you guys know the COBOL programmers that banks hire, right, for their banking systems? I think it's COBOL.
Yes.
Yeah.
COBOL. Yes. common
Those people are getting
object is
paid what, like
common
$1 million a year or something stupid. Like it's an insane amount of money because there's basically 5 or 10 people. I don't know if this number is correct. I'm just making it up on the fly, but 5 or 10 people left in the world that do the thing, and these are very, very critical systems, right? And we're in no way, shape, or form going to be able to replace that anytime soon. It's just too integrated into the financial system. And so, is learning COBOL a valuable skill, and will there be a lot of jobs available to you? No. But if you were to be able to do it and then land that job, it's $1 million job, right? And so I think we're going to be in a very interesting period in which a lot of engineers are growing up, learning the skill with AI and getting to a point where they haven't made the mistakes that the senior engineers of today have made. And so they don't have the battle scars and the understanding, perhaps, about the systems that they build and maintain. So fast forward 10, 15 years. Do we have a whole bunch of COBOL banking systems out there that nobody really understands?
Yeah,
and then who's going to maintain that, right? And so there, I think there's an interesting piece where it's like, okay, if you can put in the effort and actually learn the skills through, battle scars and whatever, you're good. Like these systems will need to be maintained and they need to be built. Perhaps not into the building part of it, but there's a whole bunch of jobs out there that I think are going to be so critical. And honestly, I'm a little bit afraid about what's going to happen when everybody starts shipping all these things, right? Like there's security risks and everything is going to be a huge problem. So again, jobs might change a little bit, but I think there's very much a opportunity there to be in a high paying career. You have to realize what is not, right? Front end engineering, if that's your core skill right now, I would go expand that a little bit. Because Claude is so good at it that I don't think you necessarily have a job in the future. If everybody can just kind of describe what they want and it instantly appears. Although everything will be purple because that's apparently the Claude that the color that Claude thinks is modern.
AI thinks is modern is purple.
Yeah. Well, with that pipeline of like, I write something janky and cheap, like that's been around for decades. Like one of the cliche ones was like, I hired the PHP high school kid who knocked out my app, and now it's dying, and then I have to bring in a software engineer, and that's the MVP pipeline. So that part has been around. The scale and scope does get potentially intimidating because like if I had non-technical people that generate 1 million lines of code and then they want a technical person to come in and fix it, but to a certain extent that's also like the lawyer thing or what have you. This is where like on this sort of trying to extrapolate out, and this is one of the dangers for me, is it's really easy to extrapolate too quickly. Like one version of this to me is, now that I've knocked out several web apps just with Claude Code, is I'm almost like, well, is the future everybody just builds their own apps? Like you just say, hey, I want an app, like I want a project management app. Cool. I'm just going to describe it. And as long as I give an open API spec, or something. Some of the early documentation, I think, for OpenAI, I remember just like laughing out loud because they were like, well, how do you integrate this plugin into OpenAI? You just give it a link to the documentation and then it figures it out and you're done. And, the risk reward on the front end only versus is the back end gets privileged. And so that implies user identity security, auth, and all that stuff. And so maybe the future is just simply like a lot of these apps. Yeah, I publish the back end, and if you want to build an app on top of it, good luck and Godspeed, and everybody can build their own. And maybe they're remixes. Like maybe there's a site where it's like, here's the template prompt for a project management tool. Here's the template prompt for your reminders app or your whatever.
Like a system architecture, right? For those things. And I think you're on the right track there. And I think we're starting to see it, and we're starting to do it internally, where it's like, if we wanted a tool, this happened to us last week. I needed a tool for a certain thing, and I won't call it out because I basically built something that was out there by somebody else who built it already. But I looked at it and it wasn't perfect for what I wanted to do. And I was like, yeah, but it's also not that difficult. Or, it is difficult, but took out our MCP for a spin, and I just yelled at it what I wanted it to be, and it worked, right? It did the thing. And so I think we're going to see a whole bunch of these things. And we've seen this before with, I think, RPA, robotic process automation, and process automation in general. I think we're going to see a whole bunch, especially in larger corporations, where somebody has an issue and getting that issue resolved. If you did the traditional route, especially if it's offshore, right? You're in a 6-month project and, you got to get approval from everybody involved and blah, blah, blah. And, 6 months later, you might or might not get a solution, and it might or might not calculate the sales tax for Oregon and no other state out there, right? Or you just open Claude and you tell what you want, and you have it built in 2 days, and you can use it yourself and your problem is solved. And you are now 10x more efficient in that particular task. So I think there's a lot of that. There's also one more thing I wanted to say about the jobs, by the way, before we move on from that. I think, I've been kind of myself going flip-flopping between, are we just putting a whole bunch of people out of a job, or is this just going to 10x, the productivity of people? And I think one thing I've been seeing in the industry is that people like to blame AI. And I don't, and you see this across other industries too, right? Art and I'm not saying that any of that is good, or I'll keep my opinion to myself for that. But the point is that I think people are expecting AI to do too much right now. And in the sense that it doesn't do that just yet. We're close, but we're not there yet. And so saying that you're out of a job because of AI, I think is a little early on. And I think we're also seeing two things happening at the same time, which might make you believe that it's AI that's making it hard to get a job. But we're also in a period in which interest rates are really high, in which investments are pretty low, right? And we're coming out of a period in, I forgot what the quote was from one of our investors, but, money wasn't a problem, right? Everybody got funded. There was billions of dollars just flowing. And so everybody got hired. Because there was just so much money going around. And we've been coming out of that since probably about COVID is when things were drying up from the investment side. And so you got a couple startups that are kind of still riding the wave from that. And we're now seeing the effects of that on the hiring market, especially in tech, because it's so, volatile and directly attached to that. And so that's a very long-winded, I like to talk. It's a very long-winded way of saying,
Join the club, brother.
AI, or if it's just the fact that the money is drying up, and then you're seeing those two things happening at the same time, and you say oh, it must be AI. But in reality, we're just in kind of a dry period for funding, and so we're kind of in a dry period for jobs, and that sucks. Don't get me wrong, that absolutely sucks, and it's hard to get a job right now. It really is.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily jump to AI as the bad one here just yet. Right, it might be in the future. It's too early to tell, but I don't think it's necessarily today.
Yeah, I know individuals that talk to and blame AI. When I talk to business people and leadership, they're citing tax code issues, with how things get deducted. They're citing, it turns out that you think about investing differently at a effectively 0 or 3% rate versus a 6 to 9% rate. So that changes it. There's a little bit of a, right now the macro environment's so uncertain, and we could spend quite a long time delineating this ridiculously long list of reasons why it's uncertain. So that also makes someone say, well, I don't want to invest in building something. And it's really easy right now to say, the one thing that I have heard that there is some legitimacy around is some of the CEOs would say things like, I want my people to do AI. They're resisting, so I'm going to start firing them and replacing them. So, like you guys were talking about, well, we only want to talk to people who do Claude, right? So if you're somebody at a company, and I've been floored at how many people I know that are senior developers that say things like, I won't even look at AI. I think it's garbage, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, have you even tried it? And they'll say either no, or I downloaded it and I played with it for a few minutes and I asked it to write GTA for me and it couldn't, so I gave up, that kind of stuff. So sorting through all those issues, that's part of why I wanted to do this chat today, was to just kind of normalize that the industry is moving in this direction. Even on the apps that I'm working on, if you said to me 5 or 10 years ago, how much of the code did I write and how much of it was auto completed? Like, there's no way I could answer that, right? Like, I don't know. I use, IntelliJ and it generates a bunch of code for me, but it's just mechanically almost part of my muscle memory. If I'm using an AI to generate the code, so who cares almost? I do worry about the feeling of that culture, like geek culture, right? One of the aspects of it to me, like when I was a kid in the 80s and I was just starting on like an Apple II or something, there was this sci-fi culture, like cyberpunk and sci-fi and geek culture. And today, geek culture became a lot more common and accepted, in part because it was associated with economic success. Like when I was when I was 12 and people talked about D&D and it was like the nerd thing and how are you going to get that doesn't mean anything. I remember teachers grumping at me about going home and programming on my computer instead of doing my homework because it was like, well, that's just some weird data entry toy thing, and that obviously flipped by the time you go through .com and everything else. Now it's like, oh, it's the tech bro and the billionaires and the blah, blah, blah. So, what's the culture going to look like? How much value is there going to be on somebody who is an introverted technical person, stuff like that. I'm going to, since we're already long on time, and this has been really good, so I think it's been fine. I want to close with two hopefully quick questions to make it a little bit fun. So the first one is, when you look at like media depictions of AI right now, right? Like you mentioned LiquidMetal is why you guys, the title, and it cracks me up because it's like, well, if I'm someone who's nervous about AI, and then I bring a company in that's named after a Terminator, right? Like I can see her be like, that's a little on the nose, There's that joke about tech people where it's like, someone science fiction, guy writes the book about the Torment machine, and then the next month the tech company announces Torment machine, 1.0, and you're like, really, guys? So I'm gonna guess that your hope for the outcome of the AI industry is not Terminators and Skynet, despite the name of the company. So when you guys think about and there's so many great works, like we're seeing this resurgence of people in fiction talking about AI, right? Like Murderbot as the show on Apple TV, which is excellent. Ex Machina and Her came out, I want to say 10 years ago, roughly. And how I view those works has completely changed. We just finished, my son and I just finished watching Star Trek, the original series. And there are comments like Kirk and those guys talking about AI and robotics and technology that land completely differently now. So when you guys, and like, we could, again, this is like an hour-long thing probably because you guys, I'm sure, are into sci-fi stuff too. But like, if you said to somebody right now, what do you think your kind of favorite AI depiction of AI in media is that you'd recommend somebody check out? What would your go-to start with you, Gina?
It's going to sound dark, but it's not. It's the movie where the robot's trying to pick up all the trash. Like the world had kind of gone. It's WALL-E? A kid's cartoon, WALL-E.
WALL-E.
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of see that. Like everyone has their own personal WALL-E or C3PO, like just being helpful and kind and useful. And so what if there were a bunch of ocean Roombas out there that were cleaning up the ocean? I know people are developing stuff like that, but
right.
Those are the good sides of things. And I don't want the WALL-E thing to sound bad. Like I don't want the world to be this dark, trashy place. But I think a group of robotics and WALL-Es out there doing good things to try to make the world a better place is the depiction that I like. And we go as far as just to keep it's what's top of mind. Like we talk every week because we think we're right in the middle of it. And if someone's going to build a physical AI or an agentic AI system, it might as well be us, because I work with very ethical people. We want to do it the right way. We're capturing all of the data that's inside of it so that it's explainable. We've added things like kill switches that allow you to make it stop if it goes off the rails. Like we're thinking about AI doing things it shouldn't be doing, and then you being able to stop it by nature. And that when I say doing something it shouldn't be doing, I mean selling a car for $1 or the racial slur example or whatever it
Yeah.
happens to do. Like, I just want, or our agent is exfiltrating PII. Stop. And where did it come from? When did it show up in our system? What versions of that application currently have that PII in it? And how do I make all of them stop if it's been branched and versioned into 30 different applications? Raindrop does that. And it does it specifically because we don't want Terminator, we want Wall-E. That's my depiction. I hope that landed okay.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think Wall-E is one of those films that's so fun because it can land so differently. Like if you're a kid, you're like, oh, cute little robots running around. And if you're an adult, I think one of the things about Wall-E is it provokes a lot of questions about what's the role of humans in technology if it gets advanced enough. Like if you get to the point where the robots can do all the things, if it's embodied physical robots and much less all the white collar sort of knowledge work stuff, what's the point of a human? And that I think is an example of why I like fiction right now, because it's like trying to think through that longer term extrapolations, but it's also the challenge because we're nowhere near that, right? Like to me, one of the things I'm using as my benchmarks for the evolution of this tech is, are we solving the epics? To me, the epics include things like, does everybody have housing? Does everybody have food? Have we sorted out climate issues? Have we, personal freedom and safety and economic agency stuff? So if we haven't solved those problems yet, and we know the only way we can get to the levels to get to that meaningfully is through scaling out stuff like this, which, throw in demographic crisis issues and on, like, but doing that in a way where humans still feel like, well, I know what my role is. I'd like to get past the role for most of humanity being essentially stripped down to work or die, right? I'd like to get past that. And to get past that, we're going to need this tech, but then how do we ensure it's all distributed properly? All right, okay, what's yours?
It's going to be a little bit darker.
Ooh, darker than Wall-E. Because I actually think that Wall-E is actually a really dark movie when you
it's pretty dark. Yeah. Like so it's
yeah.
To me, it's Black Mirror. Right?
Well, that's a whole series, right?
It's a whole series, but there's a particular couple set of episodes that I think are very interesting. There's one about bringing somebody back from the death, initially where she's chatting with him, and then eventually she gives a body to him. And there's a couple about social rating systems, I think that are fairly relevant. And it's not necessarily per se about the AI there, but I think it's very much about the future. And the reason that I like the depiction is because it's effectively a warning. It's let's keep in mind where things can go wrong, right? And I think that's really important to understand that. And I think perhaps seeing that in media like that is a much easier way for people to understand than it's much more tangible than if somebody's warning you for the killer robots that are coming or something like that. Like if you understand, like, oh, that's what it might look like. Oh, I don't want that, right? And so then we can all work together to not end up there. And make a system that we all believe in, and I think that's an interesting depiction of it. There's another one more just to kind of plug is The Expanse, and there's an interesting one there about what happens if basically nobody has jobs anymore. So it's like 7 books, but basically everybody on Earth, there's too many people, not enough jobs, everything is automated, and so everybody's on universal basic income. And then there's a couple of people that are allowed to do jobs, and people want to do that, right? Because they go crazy for not working. And so I think that's another one interesting that does a pretty good job at depicting that. So anyway, those two I think I would say are my 2 picks.
Yeah, the dystopian society stuff, like it's really interesting because there's so much sci-fi and media that's dystopian in nature, and it's like we could sit here and rattle through Blade Runner, Fallout, like what have you. What I find really interesting is how comparatively rare utopian fiction is. I mean, anything that depicts a positive hope, and I read stories about, kids who are like, I don't want to have kids, I don't want to participate in society, all that stuff, because they're so depressed. And I do wonder if that's because there's just not like even a thing to hope for, to reach for. I gravitate towards Star Trek in part because of that. Although hilariously enough, if you get into Star Trek lore, it implies that humanity had to go through a World War III of some kind to get to Star Trek, which is depressing. But that question of what does a hopeful, positive future look like, the trick, and I've gone back and forth on this. Like, there was a point where I was actually like, this was like the early 2010s, where I was like, really, another story about how fascism is bad? Do I really need that? Like, can't we talk about things like, the challenges with terrorism versus state surveillance, society stuff? Like, there were things that felt more germane. And now I'm sitting here and it's like I just watched Andor, which is fantastic. It's all about how do you deal with fascism.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah. And then I'm like, I guess we need to talk more about fascism, right? So I'm a little bit sad because I'm like, I wish we weren't contending with that, right? Like, me talking to my son about things like fascism and the resurgence of fascism and right-wing extremism in the world today, it's depressing, and that's part of where marrying that with these epics, which is why I come back to, like, the point of all this is to solve a bunch of these big problems. How are we going to do that? But it's so complex. And I do wonder, and maybe that's part of the point of the dystopian stuff, is what does it look like to hit bottom as a society before we start actually getting serious about fixing stuff? My concern is there is one version of this where people get so upset about, job loss. Like, if you really got widespread, both white and blue collar work get impacted heavily by robotics, where you could even see a situation where people like talk about banning it, and it's like, okay, well, no, that's not the point. What does a UBI look like? And that was why I did this video on the channel where I talked a little bit about, like, well, what is UBI? Because, sending everybody $500 a month versus sending everybody 10,000 a month, those are completely different things.
Yeah.
And so does labor participation drop? Do you then bring in work? I'm not completely sold on, like, because you mentioned in The Expanse, I get my meaning from doing work, especially if it's working for others. That feels a little bit like missing the point a bit. We see lots of people who are able to find meaning without that. For starters, every retired person. Like, if you're retired, by definition, you're not working economically, and yet I would still say that there's value to the life of a retired person. And so what does that look like? Why do we normalize 40 hours a week, 60 hours, 30 hours? What's that supposed to look like?
I think there's a whole thing about there's certain jobs, and we talked a little bit about this earlier about, like, the value of a line of code going to zero. Same thing for the value of a line of a blog post or the value of a line of an email, right? If it's going to all be automated, then what's still left? And it's the human part, right?
Right.
And if you think about all these industries losing their jobs, but there's at the same time a whole bunch of old people in the world that need to be taken care of, which, they would much rather have a human do that than a robot, I would imagine, or I would for sure, right? And so I think it's just the nature of transitioning people into the right spaces where we actually need them, rather than just saying, like, oh, we're all going to be out of a job.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting question there, but that's probably a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
Like, my daughter's trying to be a PA, right? The number of those jobs is absolutely through the roof. I've got, I've got a son in college, and he wants to be a business major, and I'm thinking, I think it's the right job for him, but when the next one comes through, I have one that's 2 years younger, senior in high school. Like, is it a business degree, or do you just go start a business, or do you become an electrician or a plumber, or do you own a fleet of electricians and plumbers, and, like, you own that business? I don't think I'm going to see a robot wiring a new construction house anytime soon. That seems complicated and quite hard to do. And so I think there'll be a return of some of that more physical things. We already have struggled to do home building and have a decent number of people who know how to pick up a hammer and nail and actually go build something with their hands. And there's sort of a little bit of a resurgence of that piece too. It's not blue collar, I guess, is the term, but I think it's a trade. It's a real skill and a real craft. And being a welder is an art in some ways. It's not easy to do, and you really have to be good at it to be good at it. And Those jobs are 6-figure jobs, and they're all over the place, and people need them. And so I think there's just this shift of, well, I think Folk had mentioned it earlier, the software engineer making $1 million because they can work at Google or Facebook. All right, maybe there's not as many of those in the future, but the number of 6-figure jobs there are out there to be a plumber, a welder, or an electrician, or a framer at a house, or insulation or roofing, like those jobs are rocking and rolling. And so just a different place to be.
That's where the question about the physical robots comes in, Like there's one joke. So this is my closing media thing, which is that maybe the future is it's Star Trek and Idiocracy combined, where most people on Earth are living Idiocracy, but all the really intelligent people are so frustrated that they're willing to go get onto spaceships, fly out, and die like red shirts because they're so desperate to get away from Earth because it's gotten so annoying and frustrating.
It's annoying.
All right, gentlemen.
Oh boy.
Right? That's a rough one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's your next Black Mirror? Is half a quarter of the population's all super sci-fi and the rest are is it like the time machine stuff?
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much. What's the URL to check the stuff out? LiquidMetal.ai or?
You got it. LiquidMetal.ai.
Yeah. And if you're alone and you're not just enterprise, right? So if I'm like an individual developer who's using Claude Code and I'm building apps and services, this isn't you can't look at anything unless you talk to a sales rep.
No. We have a $20 plan, a $50 plan, and a $100 plan. We match up with Claude Code. It's meant for the developer, the startup, the idea guy and gal. We'd love to have anyone who's interested jump in there. If it's okay with you, I'll give you a code. You can throw it
what? I was literally just
throw it on the video.
I'm a terrible YouTuber. I'm supposed to ask for affiliate codes.
Consider it done.
We got a $100 coupon or something like that we can throw in the description here. And we have a beta out right now. So it's not publicly available yet, but you can sign up for the beta, which basically means you'll get access. And during the beta, credits are on us. So you can just kind of build. You do got to go through a couple of hoops. I want some feedback in return, but you can try it and kind of kick the tires on it if you want to. So we'll give you the link for that one as well if you want to pump it in the notes.
Yeah, I'll put the links in the description. I'm sure if there's an affiliate code, hopefully him with his college at some point or something.
Exactly.
That
sounds out for sure.
It sounds great. But and part of it is that if you're 20, 3, 10, 20 or whatever buck a month accounts, you can be a solo developer. This isn't just exclusive for if you don't have 6 figures, don't bother to call me type stuff. So that's brilliant.
Absolutely. We actually believe that the first $1 billion solo founder is already out there, and we think you can get it with this. Right? It's one of Gino's saying. I'm kind of stealing his thunder here, but he was saying the first $1 billion founders out there, and it's tools like this that will get you there.
Yeah.
So definitely.
I think it's tools like that, and I do think one of the moats is going to be the data and social graph stuff.
Absolutely.
If it's not about just the code. Like if I'm a bank, the value isn't in the code for the app. The value is in the data set that's tracking all the money in the transactions 100%. and that integration. So I think that there's potential there. How much the marketing costs and all that, but in any event. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your time, and check out the description in the notes. All right.
Thank you.
Care.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks.